I'm Alex.
And I'm Jamie.
What follows reflects our opinion based on the records available to us, including the HOA's published reserve studies, budgets, and related disclosures.
We encourage all HOA members to review those same documents and draw their own conclusions.
Today, we explain why, in our opinion, the HOA's own records support the view that its reserve studies fail to provide a reliable basis for long-term financial planning, and how those failures translate into real financial risk.
Before turning to specific examples, it is important to understand how a reserve study is intended to function. A reserve study is the HOA's working schedule for when specific common assets are expected to be repaired or replaced, and how much money must be set aside to pay for that work.
Each study assigns 3 concrete data points to every asset. 1. Responsibility, meaning whether the HOA treats the item as its financial obligation. 2. Remaining useful life, meaning how long the item is expected to last before major repair or replacement. 3. Replacement cost, meaning the estimated cost when that work occurs.
Replacement costs change over time. Inflation, labor, and materials fluctuate. That is expected.
Responsibility and remaining useful life, however, should not change unless something concrete has changed, such as completed work, new technical analysis, or a formally approved board decision.
In standard reserve practice, major components and assumptions carry forward from one study to the next, unless there is a documented reason to revise them. Assets are not typically added, removed, or reassigned new useful lives without a clear, explainable basis.
Without stability in those assumptions, long-term financial planning becomes unreliable.
With that framework in mind, we reviewed successive Highgate reserve studies side by side.
Across those studies, the same assets show different remaining useful lives, different responsibility assignments, shifting scopes of work, and components that appear in one study disappear in the next and later reappear.
These are not minor cost rounding adjustments. They involve changes to core planning assumptions.
From a governance standpoint, this creates a serious problem.
If reserve studies do not consistently identify which assets are included, how long they are expected to last, or who is responsible for funding them, the board cannot reliably prioritize reserve contributions, sequence projects, or set realistic timelines.
For homeowners, the impact is practical and financial. Maintenance is deferred, funding gaps grow quietly, and costs resurface later as significant dues increases or special assessments when the work can no longer be postponed.
We will now walk through specific examples from the HOA's own reserve studies.
Earlier reserve studies include driveway aprons as HOA reserve components.
Later reserve studies omit driveway aprons entirely or significantly narrow their treatment.
The studies do not cite amendments to governing documents, changes in property ownership, easement modifications, or board resolutions explaining that shift in responsibility.
When responsibility is reassigned or removed without documentation, projected funding requirements change as well, sometimes substantially.
Responsibility is one issue, scope is another.
Earlier reserve studies reference driveway-related components but do not define square footage, boundaries, or total area.
The most recent reserve study asserts responsibility for approximately 9,900 square feet of driveway aprons.
Based on that quantified scope, the study projects costs totaling $236,727 in today's dollars, distributed across multiple future years.
The study does not show how the 9,900 square feet was calculated, or how that figure reconciles with earlier studies that did not quantify apron area.
We analyze the ownership basis, county records, and governing documents related to this issue in our episode on driveway aprons linked below.
Earlier reserve studies assigned the stormwater management system a remaining useful life and identified a future capital obligation of approximately $150,000 at that time.
Later reserve studies extend the remaining useful life of the same system.
The reports do not document full replacement, reconstruction, or a formal engineering reassessment that would explain that extension.
When the remaining useful life is extended without documented work, funding obligations are delayed, and the reserve fund may not build the savings necessary to cover the eventual cost.
We examine the stormwater projections and long-term financial concerns about this asset in greater detail in our episode on the stormwater management system linked below.
This pattern is not limited to stormwater.
Earlier reserve studies assign a defined remaining useful life to asphalt pavement.
Later studies shift that remaining useful life forward or backward.
The studies do not document full resurfacing or reconstruction between inspection cycles sufficient to justify those changes.
In some studies, stormwater infrastructure, sometimes classified as part of the stormwater management system, is identified as a significant capital obligation.
Budgets during the same period allocate only hundreds of dollars per year to stormwater-related line items.
There is no meaningful reserve accumulation shown toward the identified six-figure obligation.
Some reserve studies include site hardscape and concrete components as reserve items.
Other studies omit those components entirely.
When the components later reappear, the funding gap created during their absence remains.
When assumptions change without matching funding adjustments, costs are not eliminated.
Required maintenance is deferred,
Reserve balances fall behind actual needs.
and the work ultimately returns later at a higher cost, often funded through special assessments.
Reserve study disclaimers state that the study was prepared exclusively from information obtained through public records, public officials, and the association. They further state that asset classifications were derived from information provided by the association and through conversations with management and the board. The cost estimates are based in part on information provided by the association.
Those statements indicate that the board had visibility into the assumptions and inputs used in preparing the studies.
Whether homeowners had similar visibility is a separate question.
We examine Highgate's broader fiscal history, budget trends, and long-term financial trajectory in our episode titled What the Data Shows, linked below.
Lower reserve contributions in the near term can appear manageable.
But they may understate the true long-term cost of maintaining the property. The impact is that the financial burden is shifted into the future. For owners who intend to remain in Highgate long-term, this record should be reviewed carefully.
Because reserve assumptions made today determine the scale of assessments required tomorrow.
Review the reserve studies and budgets. Compare them year to year. Form your own conclusions. Do not rely on ours alone.
When assumptions change, ask why and request documentation.
Attend board meetings. Ask questions on the record. Hold the board accountable. They are your neighbors, but they are making decisions that impact your financial future.
Long-term costs do not disappear,
They are either funded or deferred.
and deferred costs return.
If you found this episode useful, please share it with your neighbors.
Until next time.